Welcome. I'm Mr. Shelby, and I want to start this book by telling you something that took me a long time to fully understand. Something that, once it clicked for me, changed everything about the way I move through the world, the way I relate to women, and the way I see myself as a man. Attraction is not something you negotiate. It is not something you earn through effort alone. It is not something you can convince a woman into. Attraction is something that either exists or it doesn't. And your entire job, from the moment you meet a woman to the moment you're 10 years deep in a relationship with her, is to understand what creates it, what sustains it, and what destroys it. That's what this book is about. That's what I'm here to teach you. I didn't always know this. I want to be honest with you about that right from the start. I was not born understanding how attraction works. I had to learn it the hard way, through confusion, through rejection, through relationships that fell apart and left me sitting alone, wondering what I did wrong. Through years of doing everything I thought I was supposed to do, being kind, being available, being loyal, being the good guy, and still coming up short. Still watching women lose interest, still ending up in situations that made no sense to me logically, but were painfully clear emotionally. And I remember the exact moment things started to shift for me. I was sitting in my car after a conversation with a woman I was deeply interested in. A woman who had, for the third time in a row, given me the slow fade. You know what the slow fade is. She doesn't break up with you. She doesn't have a conversation. She just gradually becomes less available, less responsive, less present, until eventually you have to admit to yourself that it's over. Even though nothing was ever officially started, I was sitting in that car and I said to myself out loud, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. And that question, that honest, painful question, was the beginning of everything. Because here's what I've learned after years of studying this, years of coaching men through it, years of watching the same patterns play out over and over again across every type of man in every type of situation. Most men don't have an effort problem. Most men don't have a kindness problem. Most men don't have a loyalty problem. What most men have is a fundamental misunderstanding of what attraction actually is and how it actually works. And that misunderstanding, that gap between what they believe creates attraction and what actually creates it, is the source of almost all their pain in relationships and dating. So let's fix that right now. In this first chapter, let's build the foundation that everything else in this book is going to stand on. Because if you don't have this foundation right, nothing else I teach you is going to land the way it should. The first thing I need you to understand, and I mean really understand, not just intellectually agree with, but feel in your gut, is that attraction is an emotion. It is not a logical conclusion. It is not a decision. It is a feeling that arises in the body before the mind has even had a chance to weigh in. When a woman feels attracted to a man, that feeling is not the result of a conscious evaluation. She didn't sit down with a pros and cons list. She didn't calculate whether his income bracket, his physical appearance, and his emotional availability added up to something worth pursuing. The feeling came first. The feeling always comes first. And everything logical that follows, her deciding to go on a date with him, deciding to pursue something, deciding he's worth her time, all of that is the mind catching up to justify what the heart already decided. This is so important. I want you to really sit with this, because the reason so many good men end up frustrated and confused is that they are trying to create an emotional response through logical means. They are presenting evidence. They are building a case. They are saying through their actions and their words and their consistency, look at all the reasons you should feel attracted to me. And they cannot understand why it isn't working, because to them, the logic is airtight. They are a good man. They treat her well. They're consistent. They communicate. The case is strong. So why doesn't she feel it? Because you're in the wrong courtroom, brother. Attraction doesn't live in the mind. It lives in the body. It lives in the feeling. And to create a feeling, you have to operate at the level of feeling. You have to understand what kinds of energy, what kinds of presence, what kinds of behavior create that emotional response in a woman. And then you have to embody those things, not perform them, embody them. There's a massive difference, and that difference is everything. Let me tell you about the first major lesson I ever received about this. I was in my mid-20s and I had a friend, I'll call him Aaron, and Aaron was not what you would call conventionally impressive on paper. He didn't have a high-paying job. He drove an older car. He wasn't the tallest guy in the room, but women were drawn to Aaron in a way that I genuinely could not explain at the time. And I remember watching him one night at a social event, just observing him, trying to figure out what it was. And what I noticed, and this stuck with me, was that Aaron never seemed to need anything from the interaction. He was fully present, fully engaged, fully himself. He wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to say the right thing. He wasn't checking to see how he was landing. He was just there, comfortable, complete. And women responded to that in a way that was almost magnetic. Compare that to another guy at the same event, smart, successful, well-dressed, who spent the entire night subtly auditioning. Every joke had a little anxious beat after it, waiting to see if it landed. Every story was told with one eye on her reaction, adjusting in real time based on her response. And the women in that room could feel the difference, not consciously, not in a way they could have articulated if you'd asked them, but they felt it, and they gravitated away from the audition and toward the presence. That was my first real lesson in what I now call the energy of self-containment. And self-containment is one of the most foundational concepts in this entire book, so I want to spend some real time on it. Self-containment means that your emotional state, your sense of security, your feeling of worthiness, none of those things are dependent on external validation. They come from within, they are stable, they are yours. A man who is self-contained does not need a woman to choose him to feel good about himself. He does not need her to respond quickly to feel secure. He does not need her to be in a good mood to be in a good mood himself. His internal state is not a function of what's happening outside of him. It is generated from within. And that quality, that groundedness, that stability, that sense of a man who's complete in himself is one of the most powerfully attractive things a woman can encounter. Think about it from her perspective for a moment. Think about what it feels like to be around someone whose emotional state is entirely stable and self-generated versus someone whose emotional state is a direct reflection of how you're treating them. The first person feels safe, feels solid, feels like someone you can relax around. The second person, even if they're doing everything right, even if they're kind and attentive and consistent, creates a subtle but real sense of pressure because you start to feel responsible for the emotional state. You start to feel like your mood, your responsiveness, your level of affection is constantly being tracked and responded to. And that weight, that feeling of being responsible for someone else's inner world is exhausting. And over time, it erodes attraction. I've coached hundreds of men through this. And one of the most common things I hear is, but Mr. Shelby, I'm just being sensitive. I'm just being attuned to her. Isn't that what women want? And I have to be very careful here because there's an important distinction. Emotional attunement, the ability to read a room, to be aware of how someone is feeling, to respond with empathy and care. That is a beautiful quality. Women do want that. But there is a world of difference between a man who is emotionally attuned and a man who is emotionally dependent. One is a strength, the other is a vulnerability that women will eventually, always, grow tired of carrying. The emotionally attuned man notices that she's had a hard day and creates space for her to feel that without making it about him. The emotionally dependent man notices that she's distant and immediately starts to spiral, texting more, seeking reassurance, subtly adjusting his behavior to get her back to warm. And she feels the difference every time. So how do you build self-containment? How do you develop that internal stability if you don't currently have it? This is something we're going to come back to throughout this book, but let me give you the foundation right now. Self-containment is built through having a life, a real life, a life with purpose, with passion, with people and projects and pursuits that light you up independently of any woman. When your life is full, when you have things you're genuinely excited about, goals you're working toward, friendships that nourish you, a body you're taking care of, a mind you're developing, You naturally become less dependent on any one person for your emotional sustenance. You have sources, you have roots, and that rootedness is felt by every woman who comes into contact with you. I remember a period in my own life when I had let my life get small. I had been in a long relationship that had ended, and somewhere in the aftermath, I had stopped investing in the things that made me who I was. I stopped going to the gym consistently. I stopped spending time with my friends. I stopped working on the projects that excited me. And when I started dating again, I could feel it, even if I couldn't name it at the time. I was too available, too eager, too focused on each new woman I met as a potential source of the connection I was missing in my life. And it never worked because I was coming to those interactions from a place of need. And need is not attractive. The moment I started rebuilding my life, not as a strategy to attract women, but genuinely because I wanted my life to be full and meaningful, everything changed. And this is something I want you to hear very clearly because it's one of the most important things I'll say in this entire book. You cannot build an attractive life as a strategy to attract women. It doesn't work that way. Women can feel the difference between a man who is genuinely living his life and a man who has constructed the appearance of a life to seem more attractive. The authenticity has to be real. The passion has to be real. The purpose has to be real. And when it is, when you are genuinely, deeply invested in becoming the best version of yourself and building a life you're proud of, attraction follows naturally, not as a result you were chasing, but as a side effect of who you become. Now, I want to talk about something that I think is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in modern dating, and that is the dynamic of masculine and feminine energy. I know those words can sound a little abstract, so let me make them very concrete for you. Masculine energy at its core is directional. It moves towards something. It has purpose, focus, and presence. It is grounded. It initiates. It leads. It provides a sense of direction and security. Feminine energy at its core is responsive. It flows. It is emotive, expressive, and receptive. It moves in response to what it encounters. And in the context of attraction between a man and a woman, these two energies need to be in polarity, meaning they need to be genuinely distinct from each other for attraction to exist. When a man is fully in his masculine energy, grounded, purposeful, leading, present, and a woman is in her feminine energy, expressive, responsive, open, there is a natural polarity between them that creates attraction. It's like a magnetic charge. Opposites attract. But when a man collapses into his feminine energy, becomes reactive rather than grounded, emotional rather than purposeful, approval seeking rather than self-directed, the polarity collapses. And when polarity collapses, attraction collapses with it. This is not about being stoic. This is not about suppressing your emotions or pretending to be something you're not. A man in his masculine energy can feel deeply, can be vulnerable, can be emotionally open, but he experiences his emotions from a place of groundedness rather than being swept away by them. He can say, I feel hurt by that without making it her responsibility to fix. He can feel fear without letting it run his decisions. He can feel longing without letting it drive him to desperate behavior. The feelings move through him. He doesn't move through the feelings. I've seen this dynamic play out so many times. A man starts dating a woman who is incredibly feminine, expressive, emotionally fluid, warm, and open. And in the beginning, he's in his masculine energy, confident, present, leading the interaction, and she's attracted, deeply attracted. But then somewhere along the way, he starts to drift. The more he likes her, the more anxious he becomes. The more anxious he becomes, the more approval-seeking his behavior gets. The more approval-seeking his behavior gets, the more he slips into reactive, emotional, dependent patterns. And she feels the shift. She doesn't always know how to name it. She might say he became clingy or too much, or that the connection changed. But what actually happened is that the polarity collapsed. He stopped being the grounded, directional presence she was attracted to, and attraction followed. So what does it look like to stay in your masculine energy in a practical, everyday sense? It means having direction in your life, knowing what you're working toward and moving toward it consistently. It means making decisions and owning them, rather than constantly deferring or seeking approval. It means initiating, in dating, in relationships, in conversations, rather than waiting to see what she wants and then mirroring it back. It means leading the interaction, which doesn't mean controlling it, but it means bringing energy, direction, and decisiveness to it. And it means maintaining your emotional groundedness even when things feel uncertain or difficult. This leads me to something I call the principle of detachment. And I want to be very careful about how I explain this because it is often misunderstood. Detachment does not mean not caring. It does not mean being cold or indifferent or emotionally unavailable. Detachment, in the way I use the word, means caring deeply about someone and about the relationship while simultaneously not being attached to a specific outcome. It means showing up fully, investing genuinely, pursuing with intention, and releasing the grip on needing her to respond in a specific way. It means being able to say, I'm fully here, I'm fully invested, and I'm fully okay regardless of how this turns out. This quality is extraordinarily rare and it is extraordinarily attractive because when a woman feels that a man is completely present with her but not desperate for her, that he genuinely wants her but doesn't need her, she feels something very specific. She feels safe. She feels like she can be herself around him without triggering his anxiety. She feels like she can pull back on a difficult day without sending him into a spiral. She feels free. And freedom, real emotional freedom in a relationship, is one of the things women crave most deeply and find most rarely. I want to tell you about a client I worked with. I'll call him Michael. Michael came to me after a breakup that had completely shaken him. He had been with a woman for about 8 months and he was deeply in love with her. And somewhere around month 4, she started pulling back. Not dramatically, but noticeably. She became a little less responsive, a little less affectionate, a little more focused on her own life. And Michael, feeling the shift, did what most men in that situation do. He doubled down. He became more attentive, more communicative, more demonstrably loving. He started checking in more, planning more dates, sending more thoughtful messages. He was working so hard to pull her back toward him, and the more he worked, the further away she went. Until eventually she ended it. And she said something that stayed with him, that he said to me in our first session with genuine bewilderment. She said, I just felt suffocated, and I don't even fully know why. And he looked at me and said, Mr. Shelby, I did everything right. How does a man love a woman too much? And I said to him, Michael, the problem wasn't that you loved her too much. The problem was that your love had conditions on it. It was saying, I love you and I need you to stay close to me so that I can feel okay. And that condition, that need, was what she felt. Not the love, the need. Real love, the kind that is actually sustainable, the kind that actually deepens over time, is love without conditions on the outcome. It is love that gives freely without demanding a specific response. It is presence without possession. It is care without control. And that kind of love can only come from a man who has his own foundation, his own sense of self, his own life, his own internal security that exists independently of the relationship. Michael and I spent several months working together. And the work was not primarily about dating strategies or communication techniques. The work was about rebuilding his own life, getting back into the gym, reconnecting with his purpose at work. He had a business he'd been neglecting because the relationship had become the center of everything, reconnecting with his friends, developing his own interior world again. And as he did that work, something shifted in him. He became less anxious, less reactive, less focused on what any particular woman thought of him, more focused on who he was becoming. And from that place, his relationships, not just romantic ones, all of his relationships, became richer and more easeful. That is the foundation. That is what I want you to understand before we go any further in this book. Everything else, the communication skills, the understanding of female psychology, the specific dynamics of dating and relationships and reattraction, all of it is built on this foundation. A man who knows himself, a man who has a life, a man who is grounded in his own sense of purpose and worth, a man who can love fully without losing himself, a man who leads from a place of strength rather than fear. Without that foundation, everything else is technique, and technique without foundation is fragile. It works sometimes in certain situations, but it doesn't hold. Women can feel the difference between a man who has genuinely done the work and a man who has learned some techniques. They always can. Always. I want to spend a moment talking about something that I think is one of the core wounds that most men are walking around with. And I say this with complete compassion because I walked around with it too for a long time. And that is the wound of conditional worth. The deep subconscious belief that you're only as valuable as your most recent success, that your worth as a man is determined by your job, your income, your appearance, your relationship status, how many women want you, that you're worth something when things are going well and worth less when they're not. This wound shapes everything. It shapes the way you pursue women desperately because each rejection confirms the fear. It shapes the way you behave in relationships anxiously, because if she leaves, it means you weren't enough. It shapes the way you handle conflict defensively, because you cannot afford to be seen as wrong, because that would mean you are less. And it shapes the way you love conditionally, even when you don't mean to, because underneath the love is the need to be loved back as confirmation that you are okay. And the antidote to conditional worth is not accomplishment. You cannot achieve your way out of this wound. I've seen men with extraordinary success, money, status, physical appearance, who are still completely driven by this underlying insecurity. Because the wound is not about what you have or what you've done. It's about what you believe about who you are at the core. And the only thing that heals it is developing an unconditional relationship with your own worth. Deciding, choosing as an act of will that you practice every day, that you are a man of value, not because of what you produce or what women think of you, but because of who you are, because of your character, your values, your way of moving through the world. This is the inner work. And I know that inner work is not the sexiest topic. Men want tactics. Men want scripts. Men want to know exactly what to say and when to say it. And I'm going to give you all of that as we move through this book. But I will not give it to you without this foundation, because I've seen too many men learn the tactics without a foundation and wonder why their lives didn't change. The tactics without the foundation are like building a house on sand. It looks right. It might even hold for a while, but it won't last. Let me give you something practical to take into your life right now, today, as you listen to this. I call it the question of self-leadership, and it's simply this. In any situation, whether you're texting a woman you just met, navigating a difficult moment in a relationship, or processing a rejection or a breakup, ask yourself, what would a man who truly loves and respects himself do right now? Not what would make her happy, not what would reduce the anxiety you're feeling, not what would increase the chances of a specific outcome. What would a man who truly loves and respects himself do? That question will not always give you a comfortable answer. Sometimes the answer will be to not send that text, to not make that call, to let the silence sit even though it's uncomfortable, to end something that isn't working even though you're afraid of being alone, to hold a standard even though holding it means risking her disapproval. But if you can learn to ask that question and act on the answer consistently, even when it's hard, you will be developing the most important muscle in this entire journey, the muscle of self-leadership. And self-leadership is the foundation of everything.